So, Bobby, how are you, man?
Hey, good to talk to you. I have a lot of questions. And by the way, we're rolling. So I have a
Cool.
lot of questions because, especially with what you're doing and what you specialize in with Team Mercury. But just to
Yeah.
give people just a background on who you are, five-star recruit. You played tight end. You went to Penn State. You obviously have a college football career that you have the longest touchdown reception by a tight end in Penn State history. How long was that reception, by the way?
It was 68 yards, man, and I'm gonna hold on to that one forever. I've been telling people every time, everywhere I go, I tell people about that record.
You don't think someone's going to hit a 70, 80 yarder? You don't think that'll ever be broken?
Yeah, no, you know those records that are like longest touchdown by a freshman who was under 6'2", and yeah.
So Adam has this like a great playing career, but then Team Mercury is. Will you explain that to our listeners before I kind of get into some questions about it?
Yeah, so Mercury's a sports media company at its core. We have a variety of shows, podcasts, talent. You can kind of think of it as a Barstool Sports that specializes in just college sports, and we actually partner with colleges and universities, some of which Kentucky, Kansas, Oklahoma, Clemson, Villanova, UCF, some premier colleges in college athletics, to partner with them to create these fan experiences, these fan platforms, and then also do NIL deals with their players, which allows us access that really no one else has. And we have a few shows that student athletes actually host. So it's a pretty cool concept, pretty unique. At its core, we're a sports media company.
So the NIL is what I'm super curious about and your thoughts on it. And just to give you my background, I think I've done NIL deals with about 12 or 13 players at the University of Arkansas, from football players, women's basketball, cheerleading, etc. So I try to support those guys, meaning guys, women,
Yeah.
both. And so let's just talk about it. And how do you feel the NIL is affecting college sports, and in good way, bad way? Like, what are the pros and cons so far?
I mean, it's changed the game completely. I mean, as you know, Bobby, we're still kind of in the phase of figuring it all out, right? It's what are the implications? What's it mean long term? How are universities involved? When this came down, it obviously came down from a court ruling, but still there's been state laws that are different across states. I mean, for a long time, you look at Penn State versus Ohio State. Ohio State coaches were allowed to be involved in NIL deals based on their state law, while Pennsylvania coaches weren't. So it's been this kind of uneven playing field. No one really knows what's going on. I think at its core, NIL is a great thing. I mean, I remember being back in high school and college and like writing essay papers about why student athletes should be able to get paid and make money off their name, image, and likeness. Now, the issue with NIL is that when NIL came down and the court ruling happened, and it was intended to be, the starting quarterback doing an NIL deal with his local car dealership, right? The stuff you're doing, Bobby. That's what NIL is intended to be allowing student athletes to do that. What it's not intended to be is collectives raising a bunch of money and paying a player to transfer to their school, paying a player to come to their school, and that's where the discrepancy is. In the NFL, you have marketing deals, you have players able to do that. There's a salary cap. In college football, you have this thing called recruiting. And recruiting determines who wins the national championship every single year. It's not about the X's and O's. It's the Jimmys and Joes. It's a long time saying around college football. It's all about recruiting. And when you tie in NIL with recruiting, obviously pay for play happens a little bit. You got people trying to use NIL in recruiting to pay players to come to their school. That's where the issue is. But I really think at the end of the day, at its core, it's a great thing for the sport. I think it's a great thing for the student athletes. But obviously, there's still a lot that needs to get figured out. And I think at some point, we'll probably see some federal legislation come down that governs the entire thing, because I think the NCAA has shown they can't really handle it.
Or really anything consistently.
Anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
not just the NIL.
I feel like we're aligned in a lot of ways because I advocated, even lobbied to lawmakers if I felt it needed it, to where if you're 18 years old in this country, you can vote and you can X, Y, and Z, and somebody in a classroom that's in a college classroom can be an influencer and they can make, but an athlete's actually being punished because he wasn't
Yeah.
able to just do equally what everybody else was doing, right? So
Yeah.
it wasn't that you're giving the athlete any sort of just, we're giving you free money. Like, if they were strong enough, good enough, known enough, to actually get a deal for social media or podcasting. That's what everybody's able to do. Why should they be punished? So we're very aligned on that, because this is a country too where you're 18, you're an adult, you should be able to make some money at the same time. Very old school, archaic rules in college sports. And so, like, I was totally all in. I'm still all in, and I love it. But at times, as you mentioned, it does feel very chaotic. And you hear about some of these deals, and I hear about some of these deals through people that I work with, and there are no rules. It is the Wild West.
Yeah.
So what is going to need to happen? Because usually it takes something really bad or crazy to happen to actually create some sort of force for good. What's going to have happen to have some rules here?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and I really don't have a great answer for how you fix it. I think the problem comes from this one area that I believe is like the main thing that drives the frustration. It's that, when back up, I mentioned the NFL players, and I'm sure you know a bunch of guys too that complain about this. I'm sure the amount of friends I have in the NFL who complain about not making any money on marketing deals is exponential. I mean, the amount of guys that are starters in the NFL who complain and are like, man, I only make $100,000 in marketing deals, which is a lot of money, but a lot of time you think these guys make more money. So like that's because that's the real market value that they bring to a brand, right? If you're a starting tight end in the NFL, you're not making $5 million a year in marketing deals. You may make, some money here and there. So I say that to say that the reason the value is so high in college football and NIL deals, which are supposed to be marketing deals, is because of the recruiting and this one thing called the transfer portal, right? The transfer portal changed the game completely. You got a guy, for an example, is one of my friends, Kenny Pickett, right? First round draft pick, number one quarterback in the country at Pitt. The guy made $100,000 his senior year at Pitt, and he was a Heisman candidate, number one pick in the NFL draft, right? Only made $100,000. His market value would have gone up probably 50x if he just entered the transfer portal.
And
right, if he entered the transfer portal, he's now worth $3 million to a school. But because he stayed at Pitt, he's not worth any. He's worth, what's he worth in money to Pitt business, right? Like what are they going to pay him to do a car dealership commercial? So these guys are incentivized to enter the portal because they're worth more money on the open market. They get more NIL money. The schools use it to bribe them or get them to come to their school. So the combination of NIL and the transfer portal, I think, is really, you combine everything at the same time. College football has changed more in the last 5 years than it changed in the last 100. At the same time, you combine NIL, so players can get paid. You combine the transfer portal with an unlimited a first-time transfer waiver without having to sit out, and then you also combine recruiting being at the most competitive level it's ever been. It's a bad combination, and that the portal and the NIL together is where you hear the bad things happening, right? And you hear the frustration. You hear the Jordan Addison story of leaving Pitt to go to USC last year. I'm sure you remember that story, on a massive NIL deal. You hear the stories about Jaden Rashada, the quarterback who commits to Florida. They promised him $12 million or whatever it was, and they don't have the money to pay him. It's those combinations that make it that cause issues. So I think if you see anything happen soon, I think it could be some kind of legislation around the transfer waiver, or not allowing guys to actually transfer right away after 1 year, maybe making them wait 2 years or 3 years to transfer, something around there. I don't have an exact answer, but I think that's where the problem really stems from.
And you bring up a great point when coaches have to keep recruiting their kids to stay, not just recruiting their kids to come to the program. And what's happening is they say, okay, the coach has got to convince the kid they want to stay, but it's almost like you've got to convince the kid and pay him more. It's almost like a contract negotiation just so they don't decide to leave. And again, if I were a 19-year-old kid and I didn't come from money and I needed money, I'd probably jump too if I could get $300,000, $400,000, $500,000.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's life-changing money. Even, and one of the reasons I like NIL, and it sounds like you're in the same mindset, is you got the kid. It's not always the guys making $3 million, right? It's the starting offensive lineman who was able to make $25,000 his senior year, and that completely changes the trajectory of his life, right? You leave college football, maybe you don't play in the NFL, but if you leave college football and you go to the real world and you have $30,000 in the bank because you did NIL deals, I mean, talk about the advantage you have on the rest of the workforce, on the rest of the people out there. It's little things like that. Maybe it's 10 grand. Maybe it's the kid that can. I mean, I remember teammates of mine who would get the Pell Grant checks, right? The checks for low income families, for student athletes that would get their checks for, a couple $1,000 a semester and send it directly home to their families. And that always broke my heart. I'm like, man, like, where's your money? What are you doing? Well, my family needs it. So, to tell those kids that they can't go make $1,000 to do an autograph signing, like, that's ridiculous to me. At the same time, there needs to be some kind of structure with NIL.
And we can jump off this in a second, but something that I found while setting up these deals with different attorneys and people at the university to make sure that we met all the requirements and everything was above board. I needed to make it above board for me as well, being a public figure. That what I learned is you can basically go, all right, I didn't do this. Like my first one was Jalen Williams, who now plays basketball at Oklahoma City, but he's an Arkansas guy. I gave him $15,000 over a series to promote one of my TV shows. And so I had him working. You could see him working. We had it all out in public. It wasn't like $1 million deal, but I felt like it was enough where he really felt valued. He did the work. And where you come in, especially with your business now, it sounds like you're getting some of these athletes to actually do the work where I could literally, how I felt while doing these deals, I could say, hey, I'd like for you to come knock on my door, say hi, and I'm going to get you $1 million. And it's not having to be reported. There's no maximum or minimum of work you have to do. It's just, we've agreed for this and I can pay you this. And that felt like wildly just so open-ended that you could pay anybody any amount to really do nothing, where you guys are actually doing shows with athletes.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. NIL, for an NIL deal to be allowed, there has to be some kind of transaction there, right? You can't just pay a guy. It has to be, like you said, it has to be, there has to be an exchange of services. They have to promote something or some kind of marketing deal. But really, I think the NCAA legislation says something like it has to be fair market value. But like, who decides what fair market value is? A collective may tell a quarterback, we're going to pay you $1 million to come to our school. In exchange, you have to post on social media 3 times, right? Like, that's not actually fair market value, but who can tell them that's not, right? Who can tell a business that's not worth it for them? So that's where another huge issue comes in. But yeah, I mean, at Mercury, the cool, I have no interest in paying an athlete without getting something in return, right? There's nothing in that game for me. There's nothing in it for you and your business either. So, for us, it's all about nowadays is we're seeing athletes want to do their own content. When I was playing football, it was almost, not even long ago, it was almost frowned upon to do your own media. It was almost like, oh, we're football players. We don't talk to the media. Media is the bad guys. Nowadays, you see guys, and it started with Pat McAfee, Draymond Green doing his own show, JJ Redick doing it. You see these guys that are now athletes want to host their own shows, want to do their own media, and they can go right to the source. They can end a game and do a podcast and explain what happened, and not have to explain it to a press conference of 30 reporters staring at them. So that we've capitalized on that and just found these guys. I mean, I literally reach out to almost every day of Division I Power 5 football players that want to start their own show. And for us, it's like, where can we put our resources? What makes sense? What can we actually produce? But it's exciting. It's a fun time to be a student athlete. And that's another way that NIL, I really think NIL is a part of that, is not directly, but NIL has changed the game and the mindset where athletes now want to build their brand. They're not afraid to be public. They're not afraid to talk to the media and do their own media. It's really commercialized college sports. And I think it's pretty cool to see athletes, building their brand and taking advantage, because a lot of them also want to be in media when they're done playing.
Do you feel like you missed out on a bunch of money? Because you're a 5-star recruit, and that's got to be, you got to be the belle of the ball everywhere you go, especially when it comes to your senior year. I mean, as a 5-star recruit, just think of the cash you could have made if this was the deal back then.
It's funny. I was, one of my best friends is a guy named Christian Hackenberg. Remember him? Was a 5-star recruit, went to Penn State with me and played for the Jets for a while. We were just, he was on my show the other day, and we were talking of just about, like, we would have made some money, especially at Penn State. Penn State's that's an intense community around the football program, and the time we went there too. I mean, we went to Penn State in the middle of the Penn State scandal when the fans were trying to rally around each other. It would have been completely different. It would have been nice. I'd probably have a few more bucks than I have right now if I would have had NIL.
Tell me about your show. You mentioned it. Next up with Adam. What are you guys talking about over there?
Yeah, so we're doing sit down podcast style conversations. I like to call it a conversation, not an interview, and just talk about life. Players' careers. We've had guys on a bunch of big names in sports and college football, NFL. Jared Goff, Kenny Pickett, that I mentioned. A bunch of different media personalities and stuff. Really, just a lot of times I'm going to these guys and bringing a video crew, and where if it's a big enough guest, going to them and sitting down in their living room and just talking about their story and life. Which I really enjoy. I think for a lot of guys, you get so as an athlete, you get brought up in this culture of like being afraid of what you're saying in public and being afraid of the media and being afraid of making sure you don't say anything wrong. What we try to do is just take that down and make them, have them almost forget that they're on a podcast and just open up and talk. And then, I always tell the guys, if you say anything you don't want in there, we can always take it out, but let's just be open and have some fun with the conversation.
What about coaching for you? You spent 2 years at Arizona State under Herm Edwards, right? Like, why? And I think I saw that you were the youngest position coach at a Power 5 school. Like, one, did you like coaching? Two, what was Herm like? And three, would you go back?
Herm's the man. I mean, Herm is exactly what you see on TV. Is the guy with the energy. You see the playoffs rant, like that's Herm. Every day you walk in the office and that's the energy. I mean, he was really a good. He was coaching his coaches really well, and he taught us a lot about leadership, how to treat people, how to get people to believe in yourself. How to his big thing. He always said that if you're a coach and you got these players or a leader of any kind, you have to give people hope. That's what he always said and always reminded us of it. I still have, Herm wasn't a big texter, not a big email guy. So every day I would, 3-4 days a week, I'd walk into my office at Arizona State. And when I was a tight ends coach, I'd have a printed out piece of paper with a message of the day from Herm, right? He would get in there early at 4 a.m. and I'd walk in, and on my desk was a piece of paper. I still got tons of them with a quote, with a piece of advice, words of wisdom, words of encouragement. He would actually type it out and give it to the coaches, which was really cool. Just it's a funny thing though, thinking of like you could just text me that, right? But it definitely brought a different level of to it when it's printed out. But Herm's a man, and he was really fun to work with. I loved coaching. There's very few, especially with being how young I was. There's very few jobs or roles where you can have as much of an impact on people as you can as a coach. I mean, you're literally changing people's lives, and you're building people up and changing or giving young men opportunities. The thing that's changed about coaching, and you're seeing a lot of guys get out of coaching or try to get to the NFL, is what we just talked about, man. I mean, you got as a college coach, number one, it's all about recruiting. It's maybe 80% talent acquisition and 20% talent development. I mean, it is all about recruiting. And NIL has changed that completely. I mean, you mentioned it, Bobby. You're recruiting your own roster over and over and over again, and constantly these guys are getting hit up by their agent, by other people saying you can get, if you go in the portal, you'll make this amount of money. You can go here for this NIL deal. So it's a tough time to be a college coach. I mean, there's a lot of guys that don't want to do it. For me, I always had this passion for media and wanting to get into it, so it felt like an easy transition, especially when everyone Herm left ASU and but it was a fun time, man. I mean, I think will I ever get back into it? I think it's definitely possible. Like I said, there's few things you can make as much of an impact, but I'm definitely enjoying what I'm doing now.
Final question for you when it comes to the NFL draft. It's always been Bryce Young, and then quickly for a while it was C.J. Stroud when the Panthers traded up to number one. Even the odds flipped heavily, but now it's back to Bryce Young. Where do you see this falling with Bryce, C.J. Stroud, just the quarterbacks? And I'm assuming that number 3 pick's probably going to get traded out, so another one of those quarterbacks and grabbed up by those teams. Like, how do you see those, let's say those top 4 quarterbacks falling?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've been back and forth on this for a while. I'll be honest. My original, I did a take on this like 3 months ago. My original order was Will Levis going first overall, which that's obviously not going to happen anymore. And then I had Bryce Young, then Stroud, then Richardson. I think I'm still super high on Will Levis. I think Will Levis reminds a lot of GMs, and I think the draft media isn't as high on Levis as I believe that the GMs and the NFL front offices are. From people I've talked to, from just what I know about the game and the league, Will Levis reminds everyone of Josh Allen. And if there's one quarterback in the league that a lot of teams are trying to emulate or say we need to get this guy for our team, it's Josh Allen. It's Josh Allen, or maybe Mahomes, you possibly Hurts, but teams are trying to find the next Josh Allen, and Will Levis will remind everyone physically, mentally, emotionally of Josh Allen. So I think Levis, I still think there's a chance there's a run on quarterbacks, and you go, 4 in a row. But I think that Bryce would be the first pick. I think that's kind of seems to be the consensus now. It's going to be Bryce, CJ, Will, and then Richardson is what I believe is going to happen now, and I think that's mostly the consensus. But you never know how these things could fall, man. I think Richardson's turned some heads, but I don't think he's quite ready. Stroud's shown to be just more polished, and CJ Stroud's a guy. I just did a show on the quarterbacks a couple days ago, and I feel like we're forgetting that CJ Stroud, the kind of career he had, that he's the most decorated passer in Ohio State history, that he's incredibly accurate, which is probably the most important trait in the NFL. If I was a GM, I think right now I would take Stroud first overall. Now, again, they know a lot more than we do, but I believe it's going to be Bryce Young.
Man, you were awesome. I really appreciate you, Adam, coming on. I want everybody to check out Next Up with Adam. If you think he's awesome here, you ought to hear him there. Also, good luck with Team Mercury and follow Adam at Adam Breneman. We really appreciate the time. This has been excellent for me, and I think our audience learned a whole lot. So thank you for being so generous, Adam.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate having me.
All right, see you, buddy.